My name is Ethan, and I was 13 years old when my parents abandoned me. We were poor, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing my father never looked at me the same way he looked at my older brother Daniel. Daniel was the son he was proud of. I was the son who always seemed to cause problems. Every time money became tight, arguments started. Every time something went wrong, my father blamed me. I never understood why. Then one night, during the biggest fight our family had ever had, I finally learned the truth. I wasn't their biological son. I was adopted. The room went silent after those words. My mother started crying. Daniel looked away. Nobody denied it. For days, nobody spoke about what happened. Then one morning, my father told me to get in the car. I thought we were going somewhere together. Instead, he drove me to an orphanage. I still remember standing there with my small bag while my father signed papers at the front desk. I kept waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Nobody did. When my father turned to leave, I ran after him. I begged him not to go. For a moment, I thought my mother would stop him. She didn't. She just stood there crying as they walked out the door together. I rushed to the window and watched their car disappear down the road. I kept hoping they would come back. They never did. That was the day I lost my family. At least that's what I believed back then. For months after my parents left me at that orphanage, I kept believing they would come back. Every time a car stopped outside, I looked toward the gate. Every time a visitor arrived, I hoped it was them. But they never came. Weeks turned into months, months turned into years. Eventually, hope became disappointment, and disappointment slowly became acceptance. Life inside the orphanage wasn't easy. Some kids cried every night. Others got adopted and left. I learned to survive by keeping my head down and expecting nothing from anyone. Then one day, I met an old neighbor from my hometown. What he told me hurt more than being abandoned. My parents weren't struggling anymore. In fact, they were sacrificing everything they had for Daniel. They sold a piece of land to pay for his education. They borrowed money to send him to a better school. When he wanted to start a business, they took another loan to support him. The same family that couldn't afford to keep me somehow found a way to give Daniel everything. At first, I tried to convince myself there had to be another reason. Maybe they missed me. Maybe they regretted what they had done. Maybe they were looking for me. But as the years passed, I heard nothing. No phone calls. No letters. No visits. Nothing. The truth became impossible to ignore. Replacing me had been easy for them. While I was growing up inside an orphanage, they were building a future for the son they truly wanted. And little by little, the sadness I carried started turning into something else. Something colder. Something heavier. For the first time in my life, I stopped asking why they abandoned me. Instead, I started asking myself a different question. If my own family didn't want me, then who in this world ever would? If my own family didn't want me, then who in this world ever would? For a long time, I didn't have an answer to that question. The years after my parents abandoned me were some of the hardest of my life. I became quieter. I stopped making friends. I stopped expecting good things to happen. It felt easier that way. Then I met Mr. Thompson. He was an elderly caretaker who had worked at the orphanage for decades. Most children saw him as a strict old man, but for some reason he always treated me differently. He would check on me after school, help me with homework, and remind me that my circumstances didn't define my future. Over time, he became the closest thing I had to family. Whenever I felt angry, he listened. Whenever I felt hopeless, he pushed me forward. He was the first person who made me believe my life could become something more than the pain I carried. Years passed and his health slowly began to decline. One winter evening, he asked me to sit with him. I could tell something was wrong. His voice was weaker than usual, and for the first time, he looked genuinely tired. That's when he told me something I never expected to hear. After my parents abandoned me, they didn't disappear immediately. According to him, they came back several times during the first few years. They asked about me. They checked on me. Sometimes they would sit outside the orphanage for hours without coming inside. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For years, I had convinced myself they never looked back. But apparently they did. Then I asked the question that immediately came to mind. If they came back, why didn't they take me home? Mr. Thompson slowly shook his head. He didn't know. One day they were visiting. The next day they were gone. And after that they never returned again. No calls. No letters. Nothing. Even he never learned what happened. A few weeks later, Mr. Thompson passed away. But before he died, he left me with something I couldn't stop thinking about. For years, I hated my family because I believed they abandoned me and forgot I existed. Now, for the first time, I wasn't sure that was the whole truth. And that question would stay with me for years. That question would stay with me for years. But questions don't pay bills. The moment I turned 18, I left the orphanage and stepped into the real world with almost nothing to my name. No family, no savings, and no safety net. If I wanted a future, I had to build it myself. The first few years were brutal. I worked wherever I could, construction sites, warehouses, delivery jobs, night shifts. Some days I worked 16 hours straight and still worried about rent. There were weeks when instant noodles were the only thing I could afford. Whenever life became overwhelming, I remembered Mr. Thompson's words. I refused to let my past decide my future. Slowly things started changing. I saved enough money to start a small logistics company. It wasn't much in the beginning, just me, a rented office, and a dream that seemed far bigger than my bank account. That's when I met Alex. He was confident, smart, and believed in the business as much as I did. Before long, he became my partner. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't carrying everything alone. Around the same time, I met Sophia. She walked into my life when I least expected it. She supported me through the long nights, listened to my struggles, and celebrated every small victory. After years of loneliness, I finally knew what it felt like to have someone by my side. For the first time since I was 13, I felt happy. The company was growing. The future looked promising. And I started believing that maybe life was finally rewarding me for all the pain I had endured. Then one morning, everything collapsed. Alex disappeared. Several clients disappeared with him. So did most of the company's money. At first I thought there had to be some mistake. There wasn't. The worst part came a few days later. Sophia was gone too. Not only had Alex stolen my business, but he had also stolen the woman I loved. The two people I trusted most had been lying to me for months. I had spent years rebuilding my life after losing my family. Now I was standing in the ruins of everything I had built, wondering how many times one person could be abandoned before they finally broke. I had spent years rebuilding my life after losing my family. Now I was standing in the ruins of everything I had built, wondering how many times one person could be abandoned before they finally broke. The weeks that followed felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Without the clients Alex had stolen, the company began collapsing almost immediately. Bills piled up faster than I could pay them. Employees started leaving. Creditors called every day demanding money I no longer had. I fought as hard as I could to save the business. But some battles are already lost before they begin. A few months later, I locked the office door for the last time. Everything I had spent years building was gone. To survive, I started selling whatever I owned, first my car, then my furniture, then the few valuables I had left. Every sale bought me a little more time, but eventually even that wasn't enough. I moved into a tiny apartment that barely felt livable. Some nights I sat alone staring at the ceiling, wondering where my life had gone wrong. Then came the final blow. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I saw a photo that made my stomach drop. Sophia was smiling in a white wedding dress. Standing beside her was Alex. They had gotten married. For several minutes, I just stared at the screen. I wish I could say I felt anger. I didn't. I felt empty. The woman I loved and the man I trusted had taken everything from me and then built a happy life together on top of the ruins they left behind. That night I didn't sleep. For the first time in years, I questioned everything. Maybe my father had been right. Maybe I wasn't someone worth choosing. Maybe I wasn't someone worth staying for. After all, my parents left me. My business partner left me. The woman I loved left me. The pattern seemed impossible to ignore. And as I sat alone in that dark apartment, staring at the last few dollars in my bank account, I came closer to giving up than ever before. I didn't know it yet, but the lowest point of my life was about to become the beginning of something completely unexpected. I didn't know it yet, but the lowest point of my life was about to become the beginning of something completely unexpected. The next morning, I woke up in that tiny apartment and looked around at everything I had left. There wasn't much. A mattress on the floor, a few boxes, a bank account that was almost empty. For a long time, I just sat there thinking about my life. My parents abandoned me. The woman I loved betrayed me. My best friend stole my company. Every person I trusted eventually left. The easiest thing in the world would have been to quit. But as I sat there, something inside me refused to accept that this was how my story ended. I had lost everything before, and somehow I had survived. So I started again. This time I worked alone. No partners. No investors. No shortcuts. Just me. The first year was difficult. I took small contracts that bigger companies ignored. During the day, I met clients. At night, I handled paperwork, deliveries, and planning. Some nights, I slept only a few hours before doing it all again. Slowly, things began to change. 1 customer became 3. 3 became 10. 10 became 50. For the first time, success felt stable. Nobody was carrying me. Nobody could betray me. Everything was built by my own hands. Years passed. The small company became a national company. The national company became an international company. Suddenly, I was signing deals worth more money than I could have imagined during those nights in the orphanage. The same people who once ignored my emails now wanted meetings. The same banks that once rejected my applications wanted partnerships. The world treated me differently. Not because I had changed. Because my bank account had. Then one morning, my assistant walked into my office holding a newspaper. On the front page was my photograph. Above it was a headline I never thought I would read. Self-made billionaire Ethan Carter becomes one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. For a moment, I simply stared at the page. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I found myself thinking about a 13-year-old boy standing at an orphanage window, watching his family's car disappear down the road. That boy had spent years wondering if he was worth loving. Now the entire world seemed to think he was worth something. The funny thing was, after spending my whole life wanting people to choose me, success finally arrived at the exact moment I stopped needing anyone's approval. The funny thing was, after spending my whole life wanting people to choose me, success finally arrived at the exact moment I stopped needing anyone's approval. A few months later, I received a phone call that brought me back to reality. The orphanage caretaker who had raised me like a son had passed away. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Mr. Thompson had been the only person who stayed in my life when everyone else left. He wasn't related to me by blood, but he had done more for me than most fathers ever would. No matter how successful I became, I couldn't ignore that call. A few days later, I returned to the orphanage for the first time in years. Walking through those gates felt strange. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. The playground. The dormitory. Even the window where I had stood as a frightened 13-year-old boy watching my family drive away. After the funeral ended, the director of the orphanage approached me. She told me Mr. Thompson had left something behind specifically for me. A small wooden box. I sat alone in his old office and slowly opened it. Inside were a few personal belongings, some handwritten notes, and an old photograph. The moment I picked it up, my heart nearly stopped. It was my mother. Not a recent photograph. An old one. The same woman I had spent years trying to forget. For several seconds, I simply stared at her face. Then I noticed writing on the back. The handwriting belonged to Mr. Thompson. My hand started shaking as I read the words. She never stopped looking for you. I read the sentence again. Then again. It didn't make sense. For 20 years, I had believed my mother abandoned me and moved on with her life. I had spent countless nights convincing myself she never cared enough to come back. Yet Mr. Thompson had never lied to me. Not once. If he wrote those words, he had a reason. And suddenly, a question I thought had been buried years ago came rushing back to the surface. If my mother never stopped looking for me, then why didn't she ever find me? If my mother never stopped looking for me, then why didn't she ever find me? That question stayed in my mind for weeks. No matter how busy I became, I couldn't stop thinking about that photograph. For 20 years, I had built my life around a painful truth. My family abandoned me and moved on. Now I wasn't even sure that truth was real anymore. Then one afternoon, my assistant informed me that someone was asking to see me. I assumed it was another business meeting. It wasn't. When the office door opened, a woman slowly walked inside. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Then she looked at me and suddenly I saw the little girl who used to follow me around the house when we were children. Enma, my younger sister. The last time I had seen her, she was only 8 years old. Now she stood in front of me as a grown woman. Before I could say anything, she started crying. Not the kind of tears people use to gain sympathy. These were the tears of someone carrying pain for a very long time. I immediately thought she was there because of my money. After all, that's what usually happened whenever people discovered I was wealthy. But I was wrong. Enma never asked for money. She never mentioned my company. She never even congratulated me on my success. Instead, she told me something I never expected to hear. Our family had fallen apart. My father was seriously ill. The same man who once controlled everything could barely take care of himself. Daniel's business had collapsed under massive debt. Creditors were chasing him every day. The brother who received every opportunity had somehow lost everything. But neither of those things shocked me the most. The real shock came when Enma mentioned our mother. She was gone. Months earlier, she had disappeared without telling anyone where she was going. No phone calls. No messages. No explanation. Nobody knew where she was. Nobody knew if she was even safe. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. The photograph from Mr. Thompson's box suddenly flashed through my mind. She never stopped looking for you. And now she was missing. As Enma sat across from me crying, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. This story was never just about a boy who had been abandoned. It was about a family that had been breaking apart for 20 years. And somehow, I was still trapped in the middle of it. This story was never just about a boy who had been abandoned. It was about a family that had been breaking apart for 20 years. After Enma left my office, I couldn't stop thinking about my mother. For years, I had blamed her almost as much as my father. She was there the day I was abandoned. She watched me beg, she watched me cry, and then she got into that car and left with him. But now she was missing, and somehow that old photograph kept finding its way back into my mind. She never stopped looking for you. I needed answers. Over the next few weeks, I started digging into the past. I visited old addresses, spoke to people who knew my family, and followed every lead I could find. What I discovered shattered everything I thought I knew. My mother had spent years searching for me. Not months. Years. She contacted orphanages, she hired investigators whenever she could afford it. She spoke to former neighbors and old friends. Every time she thought she had found a lead, it went nowhere. Then I discovered something even more painful. The letters. There weren't 10 or 20. There were hundreds. Letters written on birthdays, letters written on holidays, letters written on nights when she couldn't sleep because she was thinking about me. Some were only a few lines long, others were several pages. I never received a single one. At first I thought they had been lost. Then I learned the truth. They had never been sent. My father had stopped every attempt she made to contact me. He destroyed letters. He threw away addresses. He even lied to her about leads she had found. Every time she tried to reconnect with me, he found a way to stop it. For 20 years, I believed my mother chose to forget me. The reality was far worse. She had been fighting for me all along. And she lost. That night, I sat alone in my apartment reading copies of those letters. Some were stained with tears, some were unfinished. One simply said, "I hope you're happy wherever you are." For the first time since I was 13 years old, I cried for my mother. Not because she abandoned me. Because she never truly let me go. For the first time since I was 13 years old, I cried for my mother. Not because she abandoned me. Because she never truly let me go. But if everything I believed about my mother was wrong, then what about Daniel? For most of my life I hated him. He was the son who got everything, the son my father was proud of, the son who stayed while I was thrown away. Every time I remembered my childhood, Daniel was standing on the side of the people who chose him instead of me. After learning the truth about my mother, I decided it was time to face him. Finding him wasn't difficult. The man I found wasn't the brother I remembered. He was living in a small apartment surrounded by unpaid bills and debt notices. The expensive lifestyle he once enjoyed was gone. The confident young man who had always seemed to have everything now looked exhausted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I expected excuses. I expected arrogance. Maybe even blame. Instead, I found a broken man. As we talked, I slowly realized something I had never considered before. Daniel wasn't the favorite son. He was the son carrying the burden of being the favorite. Our father expected perfection from him. Every success became a new standard. Every failure became a disappointment. Nothing Daniel did was ever enough. The more he achieved, the more approval he chased. And the more approval he chased, the less he received. Then Daniel told me something that completely changed the way I saw my childhood. The day I was abandoned, he begged our father not to do it. He argued. He screamed. He even threatened to leave with me. But he was only a teenager and nobody listened. For years, I had imagined Daniel standing there silently watching my life fall apart. The truth was that he tried to stop it. And he had been carrying the guilt ever since. Then his expression changed. There was something else. Something he had never told anyone. He looked at me and said the words that made my heart stop. Our mother didn't disappear on her own. For a moment I forgot how to breathe. Then Daniel told me the secret he had been hiding for months. And suddenly everything became even more complicated than I thought. Then Daniel told me the secret he had been hiding for months. And suddenly everything became even more complicated than I thought. After leaving Daniel's apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. Our mother didn't disappear on her own. Those words echoed in my head for days. Eventually, Daniel agreed to show me something he had been keeping hidden for years. It was an old box filled with financial records, debt notices, and documents that belonged to our father. At first, none of it made sense. Then the pieces slowly started coming together. The man I remembered as strict and controlling had been living a double life. For years, my father had been drowning in gambling debt. Not small debts. The kind of debts that ruin families. The kind of debts that bring dangerous people to your door. As I went through the records, I discovered that men had been threatening him long before I was abandoned. Some demanded money, others threatened to take property, a few threatened the family itself. Suddenly, memories from my childhood started making sense. The late-night arguments. The strangers who occasionally appeared outside our house. The constant fear that seemed to hang over everything. Then I learned the truth about the day my life changed forever. According to Daniel, my father convinced himself that giving me away would reduce the burden on the family. One less child to feed, one less child to protect, one less responsibility while he tried to save everything else. It was supposed to be temporary. At least that's what he originally told my mother. A few months. Maybe a year. Just until things improved. But they never improved. The debts grew worse. The shame grew deeper. And eventually my father became trapped by his own pride. The longer I stayed away, the harder it became for him to admit he had made a mistake. So he lied. First to my mother. Then to Daniel. Then to himself. One terrible decision became 10 terrible decisions. Months became years. Years became decades. And somewhere along the way, bringing me home stopped being a possibility and became a reminder of everything he had destroyed. For 20 years, I believed my father abandoned me because he didn't love me. The truth was somehow even more tragic. He abandoned me because he was weak. And then he spent the rest of his life trying to hide that weakness behind lies. As painful as that realization was, another thought hurt even more. If all of this was true, then my father had sacrificed his own family for a problem he never solved. And now, after 20 years of secrets, there was still one question left unanswered. Where was my mother? And now, after 20 years of secrets, there was still one question left unanswered. Where was my mother? For weeks, Emma, Daniel, and I searched everywhere. We contacted relatives, checked old addresses, and followed every lead we could find. Most of them went nowhere. Then one evening, my phone rang. A hospital. At first, I thought they had the wrong number. Then the nurse said my mother's name. My heart stopped. Less than an hour later, I was standing outside a hospital room, staring at a door I suddenly felt terrified to open. I had imagined meeting my mother again thousands of times. Sometimes I was angry. Sometimes I wanted answers. Sometimes I wanted to tell her how much she had hurt me. But standing there, none of those thoughts mattered anymore. When I finally walked inside, I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, older, fragile. The strong woman I remembered from my childhood was gone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me and started crying. Not because she was surprised to see me, because she thought she would never see me again. I later learned she had been battling a serious illness for months. While everyone was searching for her, she had quietly been moving between hospitals and treatment centers. She didn't want anyone to see her that way. Especially me. The first words she spoke nearly broke me. I'm sorry. 20 years. 20 years of pain, questions, and silence. And the first thing she did was apologize. As we talked, the truth finally came out. She told me about the letters, the searches, the arguments with my father, the countless nights she spent wondering whether I was safe. Then she told me something I wasn't prepared to hear. She genuinely believed I hated her. For years she wanted to find me. But she was afraid. Afraid I would slam the door in her face. Afraid I would tell her it was too late. Afraid that the little boy she failed to protect had grown into a man who wanted nothing to do with her. Hearing that shattered something inside me. Because while she spent 20 years thinking I hated her, I spent 20 years thinking she never loved me. We had both been suffering from the same lie. By the time the conversation ended, neither of us had dry eyes. The years we lost could never be returned. The pain could never be erased. But for the first time since I was 13 years old, I wasn't sitting across from the woman who abandoned me. I was sitting across from a mother who never stopped loving her son. And as I held her hand that night, I realized something. The person I needed to confront wasn't my mother. It was my father. The person I needed to confront wasn't my mother. It was my father. A few days later, I walked into his hospital room for the first time in 20 years. The man lying in that bed barely resembled the father I remembered. The strong, intimidating man who once controlled our entire family was gone. In his place was an old man connected to machines, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. For several moments, neither of us spoke. I had imagined this meeting countless times throughout my life. I imagined yelling at him. I imagined demanding answers. I imagined making him feel the same pain he made me feel. But standing there, all I felt was sadness. My father looked at me with tears in his eyes. Then he began to confess. Not just what happened the day I was abandoned. Everything. He admitted that his gambling addiction destroyed our family long before anyone realized it. He admitted that fear made him weak. He admitted that pride kept him from fixing his mistakes when he still had the chance. Then he said something I never expected to hear. I didn't ruin your life, Ethan. I ruined all of our lives. For the first time, he acknowledged the damage he had done to everyone. His favoritism didn't help Daniel. It broke him. Daniel spent his entire life chasing approval that never came. His lies didn't protect my mother. They trapped her in years of guilt and heartbreak. And abandoning me didn't save the family. It was the moment the family truly fell apart. The room was silent except for the sound of the heart monitor. Then my father looked directly at me. I spent 20 years wishing I could take that day back. His voice broke. But every year that passed made me more ashamed. Eventually, I became a coward. It was easier to keep lying than admit what I had done. Tears rolled down his face. The same man who never apologized for anything was finally facing the truth. Then came the words I had waited my entire life to hear. "I'm sorry, son. Not Ethan. Not boy. Son." A single word that somehow hurt more than all the others. For a moment, 13-year-old Ethan was standing in front of me again, the frightened child staring through the orphanage window, the teenager who thought he wasn't worth keeping, the young man who spent years trying to prove his value to the world. I carried that pain for so long that it became part of who I was. And now the man responsible for it was asking for forgiveness. The truth was, forgiveness didn't come in one magical moment. It couldn't erase 20 years of loneliness. It couldn't return the birthdays, holidays, and memories we lost. But as I looked at my father, I realized something. I wasn't holding onto that anger because it protected me. I was holding onto it because I didn't know how to live without it. Slowly, I stepped forward and took his hand. "I can't change the past," I said, "and neither can you." My father closed his eyes and began to cry. "So yes," I whispered, "I forgive you." Not because he deserved it. Not because the pain disappeared. But because I was finally tired of carrying it. And for the first time in 20 years, both of us were free. And for the first time in 20 years, both of us were free. The months that followed weren't perfect. Forgiveness had healed some wounds, but it couldn't erase them. My family wasn't magically fixed overnight. There were still awkward conversations, painful memories, and years of lost time that none of us could ever get back. My father continued his recovery, carrying the weight of his mistakes but no longer hiding from them. Daniel slowly rebuilt his life and for the first time stopped chasing approval from people who couldn't give it. My mother focused on her treatment, and every chance she got, she tried to make up for the years we had lost. As for me, I realized something important. For most of my life, I had been trying to prove I was worth keeping. To my parents. To Sophia. To the people who betrayed me. To the entire world. But somewhere along the way, I stopped needing anyone else's approval. I had already survived the worst day of my life. Everything after that was a choice. A year later, I used part of my fortune to create a foundation for abandoned children. I wanted to help kids who felt the same loneliness I once felt. Kids who sat by windows waiting for families that might never come back. The opening ceremony was held at the orphanage where my story began. The same building. The same gates. The same window. Standing there again felt surreal. I walked through the halls remembering the frightened 13-year-old boy who thought his life was over. Back then, he couldn't see a future beyond his pain. If I could have spoken to him, I would have told him something simple. The people who leave you do not decide your worth. You do. As the event came to an end, a young boy from the orphanage approached me. He couldn't have been older than 10. He looked at me for a moment before asking a question that instantly took me back 20 years. Did your family ever come back for you? For a few seconds I didn't answer. I looked around. At my mother. At Daniel. At Emma. At the children laughing nearby. Then I smiled. Eventually they did. The boy smiled back and ran off to join the others. I stood there watching him disappear into the crowd, just as I once watched my family's car disappear down a road. The difference was that this time I wasn't saying goodbye. I was finally home.